Welcome to the Healthy at Home webinar. We have Dr. Megan Call with us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She is a licensed counseling psychologist, an assistant clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry, and the director of the University of Utah Health Resiliency Center. She has research and clinical interest in promoting resilience and well-being among health providers with a specific focus on embracing vulnerability and discomfort, incorporating informal mindfulness into everyday practice, improving communication and relationship skills among providers, and addressing systematic change. We're super excited to have you here today, Dr. Call. Would you prefer that we hold all questions till the end, or are you going, or you can conduct it however you like? But if you want to hold it to the end, we can always announce that now. What would be your preference? You seem to be muted, Dr. Call.
Okay, there we go. I was getting some notes. Do I have an echo? Is this sounding okay?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, perfect. I'm open to whatever. So I think if people have a question, I'm happy to answer. And then if it seems like there are a lot of questions occurring and that we need to move on to some of the content, we'll just kind of move us along. So I'm pretty flexible. I try to treat presentations like a conversation. So open to questions as they unfold.
Wonderful. Well, then I will hand the time over to you. Thank you again for being here.
Great. Thank you. So as was mentioned, I'm Megan. I'm one of the directors of the Resiliency Center within University of Utah Health. The Resiliency Center has been in existence for almost 4 years. And what we really try to do is help the helpers. And there are a lot of different types of helpers within the healthcare system. And we really try to help providers, staff via system level intervention, knowing that to sign up to work in healthcare, you have to be pretty resilient to begin with. So you can imagine that this year was quite different for us. And so one of the things that we did to help share coping strategies with teams of healthcare professionals is we did a lot of writing via a learning platform called Accelerate. And I don't have any of the links here. I'm happy to send that information after this presentation. I'm sure there's a way to connect you all with a little bit more information, but that's something that you all can access. And so was invited to present on one of the articles that I wrote, which I'll share a little bit more about in just a minute. But wanted to share just a few slides that we've been sharing with our employees at University of Utah Health. And one of the things, actually I'll back up here, that we've been talking about is we've been using this phases of disaster reactions to talk about the community's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And as you can see, on the left-hand side, it describes emotional highs and emotional lows after a crisis, after an event within a community. And then it goes through the 6 different phases that occur. And so we have pre-disaster, pre-crisis, we have impact, which, for the state of Utah really was a year ago, early to mid-March, when life for all of us changed. We have the heroic period, where if I think about it from the healthcare standpoint, we had our Healthcare Heroes campaigns, right? In that honeymoon phase where everyone was checking in on one another, neighbors were doing cute things to engage in the community. In the healthcare realm, lots of meals were coming into play. People were banging pots and pans to recognize healthcare professionals. And then you can see after the honeymoon, there was a very steep decline into the realm of emotional lows, into this phase of disillusionment that we've really been in for about the last like 10 months or so. And as you can see, there are peaks and valleys within this phase of disillusionment. And the biggest concern within this phase of disillusionment is that if people don't feel like available resources meet their needs, there can really be a sense of abandonment. And so again, from a healthcare realm, we really wanted to make sure that our healthcare employees felt like they were being recognized and their needs were being met, and then also turning toward the community in the same way. I think that we're here in this phases of disaster reaction. We are coming out of the disillusionment phase, but as you can see, as we get out of disillusionment and go into this reconstruction phase, we have another dip. And we're starting to see that in terms of the well-being of some of our employees. We're noticing that nationally, that people are experiencing some distress with this anniversary of when we were impacted by COVID. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but just to highlight that we're moving into this reconstruction phase where we really think about rebuilding. What does regrowth look like as communities? And part of that is recognizing our losses that have occurred, and then also what we have learned. So making sure that there's plenty of time for reflection so that ideally we can all grow as individuals and families, right, and friends and communities. So as I mentioned, there has been a dip and people are reporting more stress than they have in some time. This figure comes from the American Psychological Association. This came out of January, where people were actually reporting, I apologize, out of January 2021, where people are actually reporting more stress, a higher level of stress than they did a year ago at the beginning of the pandemic. So on average, more people are reporting experiencing stress. And if they say, you know, what emotions go along with your stress, it's really anger, anxiety, and sadness is what people are reporting the most of. For those involved in the workplace, we're seeing that this sense of well-being amongst employees is going down. The sense of feeling socially connected to friends, family members, and colleagues has decreased. Any semblance of like a work-life balance or a combination of work and life that makes sense has decreased. And then people are describing feeling more burned out by their work, likely because of the increase in job demands that they are experiencing. So a lot of distress. And one of the things that we are really promoting right now, and I think is important to note on within this presentation too, is that all of us have experienced the pandemic similarly, and all of us have experienced the pandemic differently, and all of our experiences have equal value. It's really easy to get caught up in comparison, right, with people who are able to see grandchildren versus people who are unable to see grandchildren, versus people who have been working from home, versus those who are going in, versus those who have older children or younger children. There's so many different ways to compare, and people seem to be all over the map in terms of how they're feeling. And so again, just kind of really watching the way that we compare ourselves to one another and recognizing that all of our experiences are valid. It's really important to note as we go forward. So as I mentioned, as we head into this reconstruction phase, as a psychologist, what I really think about is how can we foster post-traumatic growth? What we know from the literature is that that people can be stronger on the other side of a crisis. This comes from Tate Shanafelt, who's the Chief Wellness Officer at Stanford and also a physician. He and his team wrote a paper toward the end of 2020. And they describe post-traumatic growth as this. Typically, post-traumatic growth develops following a physical or psychological trauma that is disruptive enough to the affected individual's perspectives and values, that it stimulates reassessment and rebuilding of psychological and philosophical beliefs and approach to living. So I like this quote. It's lengthy, but I read it because it highlights, one, that there has to be an impact that's disruptive enough to an individual's perspective and values, right? So there has been this disruption for all of us. And then there's also this opportunity for reassessment and rebuilding. And what we know from the post-traumatic growth literature is that what post-traumatic growth fosters is some pretty nice things. So openness to new possibilities, a greater sense of personal strength. We can actually experience deeper relationships, right? Even though we've been apart from one another, a stronger sense of spirituality, whatever that means to people in terms of their own spirituality, and then a greater appreciation of life. So the neat thing about post-traumatic growth is that it can be fostered. And the ways that it's done is, one, having adaptive coping skills, two, having connection with others, and then three, just having a sense of purpose. And so as I was thinking about post-traumatic growth, and I was thinking about how he kept on referring to COVID as a marathon, I began to see kind of an intersection of these concepts. And I will disclose that I've been a runner as long as I've known, or as long as I've been aware of life. My mom used to say that I would join her on a run when I was 2 years old. I don't know if that's true, but I have been a runner for quite some time. And have ran competitively in high school and college, and then pursued marathons in my late 20s and early 30s, semi-competitively as well. So I would say I have a little bit of knowledge about marathons. And I remember when people started talking about COVID as a marathon, that I was a little frustrated. And one of my biggest questions was like, who would sign up for this race? Because usually we have an option when it comes to a marathon. And then two, where is that finish line? Because again, when we start running a marathon, we at least know where the finish line is. And with this pandemic, we still don't know where that finish line is. And so, but my thought was, well, if we're going to continue to use this as a metaphor, maybe I can contribute a little bit about this. And so, as I mentioned, I wrote a piece about if COVID is a marathon, how do we get to the finish line? And really highlighted what strategies do professional runners, professional marathoners use that maybe we could use to help us. And so I know that for many of us, we're starting to feel a little bit more freedom and a little bit more hope that COVID is nearing an end. At the same time, as I was preparing for this presentation, I still think some of these strategies are useful. They're also just life strategies. And so I look forward to sharing them with you. And as I share a few of these strategies, there's 6 total. I'd encourage you to think about, what strategies am I already using and how do I keep on using them? And then if there's anything that's new, how might that work for you? How might you be able to include some of these strategies in your life? So as I said, I was just going to highlight a few professional runners that I look up to and that have certainly made their own mark in the realm of marathoning. So the first tip is just to start with the basics. When we think about professional marathoners, oftentimes we just see them at the finish line, relishing their achievement, or for some people, maybe the race didn't go as well. But what we don't see is all their investment and all their rest and refueling and recovery that occurs throughout their training. And so marathoners usually have a 4-month time of preparation before they run their race. And so a lot of their time is dedicated almost to a monk-like life where they're spending time resting, refueling, and recovering. So here we have Des Linden, the 2018 Boston Marathon champ, on the left in a race. And then she also, on her Instagram site, It has many pages of, or many pictures of her resting and refueling. And I really appreciate that she has a pie with her as well. So she's clearly getting some energy. So with the COVID pandemic, resting and refueling looks like a lot of different things for all of us. But I think just giving ourselves the permission to take care of the basics. And if we're feeling off, if we're feeling a little distressed, for whichever reason, it's always easy to just go back to the basics. And again, just making sure that there's plenty of time for resting and getting basic nourishment and recovering. The second marathon strategy that I like, and this came from when I was also running in college, is to have a plan A, B, and C. So plan A is you're able to execute the race exactly how you'd like. And then plan B is like maybe something occurs, maybe you get kind of caught behind a group and aren't able to go as fast as you'd like, or maybe, I don't know, your shoelace comes untied, something goes awry. Maybe you have a little injury that all of a sudden acts up. And so you have to modify your plan. But most things kind of still happen the way that you want. And then plan C is like all bets are off. The race is not going the way that you were planning. Things don't look good. And so really the point is just to kind of finish the race and not really worry so much about a place or how you're doing. And so what I like about plan A, B, and C, or having plan A, B, and C, is that having one or more options allows for flexibility, right? So then you can kind of bounce back and forth between the plans as needed. And then what I think it also does is it allows for more compassion. It's really easy when things don't go our way, right? Like we were planning on, like for our family, what we ended up having happen at the end of December is our plan A was actually to be able to have a very brief like outside encounter with my parents so they could see their grandchildren. We could have a brief exchange, and then we had some celebrations planned. But we all ended up getting COVID. And so our plans changed quite dramatically. And so instead of being super frustrated and down about it, right, we had to shift to plan B. How can we continue to take care of ourselves and celebrate the way that we want to, even though things are not going the way that we want? And we thought that that was one way that we could be compassionate to ourselves, be more flexible. And what was really important for us at that time is to model that to our children so they could see how to be more resilient even during times of distress. This picture is Yuki Kawauchi, who is from Japan. And this is also from the 2018 Boston Marathon. I don't know if any of you are marathon nerds, but we watch or either participate in the Boston Marathon fairly regularly. And this was it was terrible weather. There was a nor'easter, freezing temperatures. It was raining the whole time. And Yuki is a professional marathoner, but had never really won a big race before. But in his plan A was to go out quickly, but he really discovered quite quickly that that wasn't a good idea. And so what he did is he tucked behind the lead pack and just followed them. And one after another, because of people's different types of training, they couldn't withstand the weather. And so they all kind of slowly fell back, and then it was just Yuki left. And so he won his first race in this terrible weather. And one of the ways that he coped was just he kept on telling himself that the weather was perfect and that he knew how to run in those conditions. The third strategy that I really like is staying present. It's really easy during a pandemic, right? Or during a race to get caught up in what the finish line might look like or what the last little bit of a race might look like. And but what happens when we start to be really future oriented is that we miss the present. And so Ryan Hall, he actually holds the American record in the marathon. He describes really trying to practice running the mile that he's in or running the mile that you're in, to be able to have the presence of where you're at and allow yourself to take in the scenery along the way. And what that does, especially if we're wearing multiple roles of either in our families, if we're working, that it allows us to just do one role at a time and not get overwhelmed. And so this one, the Run the Mile That You're In, has resonated with a lot of people because it gives ourselves the permission to stay present as opposed to get caught up in all the other things that might be going on. The fourth strategy, and this goes directly into fostering post-traumatic growth, is this notion of connecting to purpose. Where it fits in the running metaphor is that oftentimes during races, especially during marathons, is that if people were running in packs at the beginning of a race, they start to spread out. And when people spread out and they can see the person in front of them but can't catch up to them, they know that there might be someone behind them, but that person isn't catching up to them. That's a place called no man's land. And it can be really lonely. It can also be really disheartening, especially if it happens during the middle of or kind of toward the end of a race. It's like, well, why did I sign up for this? Why did I think this was a good idea? And so being able to reconnect to purpose during that time can be a way to keep going. And so it can be something as simple as having a meaningful quote or story that you can connect to, a mantra or image that allows you to continue taking one step in front of the other, right? Moving to the next day, if we think about the pandemic. Meb Keflezighi, I'm doing all Boston references, won the 2014 Boston Marathon. And if you recall, that was the year right after the Boston bombing. And so this was the first American professional marathoner to win the Boston Marathon in some decades. And what he did is he, on his bib right there where you can see it say Meb, is he wrote the names of the individuals who had died the year before in the bombing. And as he was running, kept reconnecting to their names and his own purpose for running that race in order to keep him going forward. One of the ways that I like to connect to purpose, if we need to kind of find something to hold on to, is to think about values. Values are one-word descriptors for how we want to treat ourselves, how we want to interact with other people, and how we want to engage with the world. And so what I like to sometimes think about if I'm kind of struggling in a moment and need to pick a value to act on is I ask myself the question, a year from now, as I look back at this moment, what do I want to say that I stood for? If I were to stand for caring, like what would that look like right now? What would my next steps be? Or if I were to act on the value of self-care, what might that look like? So this is just a sampler of values. But again, it can be a great place to start, especially if you're feeling a little off and kind of don't know where to begin. A lot of people usually connect to things like caring, to curiosity, kindness, respect, and integrity. And what we tend to do is think about how we would interact with other people. But I'd encourage you as you look at this list, if any of these stand out to you, like, oh, more, maybe more kind of courage. It's the idea of like, well, how could you be more courageous toward other people? But also thinking about yourself as well. How can you move that value towards yourself and act on that value towards yourself? What would being more courageous toward yourself look like? And that can look like a lot of things. So two more. So this strategy comes from Eliud Kipchoge, who's the runner you see in this picture. He holds the fastest marathon, the world record for the fastest marathon, although he had a little bit of help along the way. So he recently broke the 2-hour mark for the marathon. And as you can see in this picture, there are some men in black singlets really cheering behind him. And that's because they were his pacing group. What he did is he ran this race essentially by himself. The purpose of this race was for him to break the 2-hour mark in the marathon. And he had different groups of, I believe, like 6 or 7 people who formed a V around him to break any type of wind that he might encounter and help him with his pacing. And those groups, I believed, changed out every few miles. So he had a fresh set of pacers come in to help lead him along the way. There were a few American runners that helped do this, and they described it as a very proud moment. So Eliud Kipchoge, his mantra and what he was really promoting during this race is "No human is limited." But my favorite is, so that's his quote, "No human is limited." But his training mantra is run at 85% instead of 100%. So all of his training is done at 85% of his capacity. And so he is able to prevent himself from burning out because he's never maxing himself out during his training. And I think that's really helpful for a lot of people, especially if the type of people that like to take a lot of things on or can keep themselves busy. And they feel like they need to accomplish a lot of things at once, of being able to do some of those things at 85% instead of 100%. Again, it allows the ability to kind of ease up, be a little bit more compassionate, and it allows for more rest and recovery for other things as well. Let's see. Oh, someone is annotating here. I'm going to go back to what I'm doing. Hold on. There we go. That should do it. Okay. So the last strategy that I wanted to share is to turn back and cheer. And this actually doesn't come from any marathon strategy. This actually comes from my experience just in the running community. When I ran cross country, it was at a small school, St. Olaf College, which some people know, usually in reference to the Golden Girls, with Rose saying that she attended there. But when I ran cross country, our team was 65 women strong, and within our 5K race, the difference between the first woman on our team and the last woman was about a 12-minute spread. And so there was enough time for many of us that when we finished, we could turn back and cheer for our teammates. And I think that's one of the reasons that I love the running community the most, is that sure, we're really competitive, but we're also very much into community. And I love this picture. This is actually at the California International Marathon. And these are the women that are cheering. They've already crossed the line and qualified for the Olympic trials in the marathon. And that 22:44:59, the time right there, the qualifying time is 2:45 on the dot. So this last person to cross just barely made it in by a second. And so I love this picture because you can see how happy people are for each other. And I think when I think about the pandemic, and I think about it as a metaphor for the marathon, is that we're not all finishing the race at the same time. And so the reminder that those of us who finish first or who finish sooner than others, it's really important as a community that we continue to support one another, because this race isn't going to be over for many for quite some time as well. So especially just to put in a plug for our healthcare workers, they may be vaccinated, but they are certainly still dealing with COVID. And so any effort that can be done to support them and other people in the community, like our essential workers who are still stocking shelves, I just think it's important that we can reach out and support them as well. Last but not least, just the reminder that we're still in this marathon together. And when I was watching Shalane Flanagan win the 2017 New York Marathon, one of the commentators as she was winning, so this was the first female American runner to win the New York Marathon in like 30-ish years. The commentator said everything that she wants is in front of her. And I very much think that that's where we are right now in the COVID marathon. Everything we want is in front of us. And I would hope that many on this call have been vaccinated already. So, you know, we're approaching that finish line as we're still kind of figuring out what we get to do now with our lives. But it's still a little bit off. And so that idea of using some of these strategies so we can keep our eyes forward, that we can stand tall and finish this together. So I shared 6 strategies with you and also shared a little bit about post-traumatic growth. I hope that this information was useful for you. What we are pushing for our healthcare workers, and I would recommend for our community members as well right now, is just really taking some time to reflect. It's been a year, and what we know is that post-traumatic growth occurs via reflection, via taking some time to reflect on, what has changed for me, what has stayed the same, and what do I want to take with me during this next stage of the pandemic. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and very happy to answer any questions about some of the strategies or other strategies, and then anything kind of mental health related to the pandemic as well.
Thank you, Dr. Call. It was excellent.